The aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, a recipe Clara had perfected over 5 decades, usually filled our home with warmth and gratitude on Thanksgiving. But yesterday, a different scent hung in the air, the acrid tang of disrespect, thick and inescapable. My son-in-law, Derek Harrison, had just delivered a punchline, a cruel mockery of my wife's hearing aid, and then, with a dismissive wave, he'd said, "It's just a joke, Art. Lighten up." My daughter Julia sat beside him, her gaze fixed on her plate, silent and small. I didn't say a word. I simply stood, the scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor echoing in the sudden silence, and then I pointed them to the door. As they left, their laughter trailed behind them, cutting through the crisp Kentucky air. "Sensitive old man," Rick called me, his voice oozing disdain. They thought it was over. They thought they'd won. But when they woke up this morning and discovered who truly owned the very foundation of Derek's professional world, they realized the joke, indeed, was entirely on them. Before I reveal how a quiet man from Lexington, Kentucky, dismantled an arrogant fool and safeguarded his family's legacy, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Arthur Maxwell, though most folks around here just call me Art. To my neighbors in this historic corner of Lexington, nestled among the rolling hills of horse country and quaint bluegrass estates, I'm nothing more than a 70-year-old widower, a retired farmer, maybe who drives a well-worn 2017 Ram pickup and spends too much time out in his barn, tinkering with old farm equipment. They see me in my faded denim overalls and scuffed work boots, mowing my sprawling lawn on a Sunday, or helping Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, carry her groceries from her car. They have no idea that the Maxwell in Maxwell Grain and Goods, a name that quietly graces packaging in supermarkets and restaurant kitchens across 12 states, stands for me. They certainly don't know that over 40 years ago, I built a sprawling agricultural logistics and processing empire, moving everything from corn and soybeans to processed meats and specialty cheeses through a complex web of distribution centers. I spun that empire out of sheer grit and a handshake deal for a single grain silo back in the early 70s, just a young man fresh out of the army with a dream and an almost pathological aversion to debt. It was a time when integrity still meant something, when a man's word was his bond, and growth was built on honest labor, not leveraged speculation. We started small, just me and a few trusted hands, but we scaled, meticulously, efficiently. The trucking routes we pioneered, the processing plants we modernized, the relationships we forged with local farmers, it all hummed like a well-oiled machine, built to last. People saw me as a simple man, grounded in the earth, and I preferred it that way. The truth is, while I divested most of the day-to-day management rights to a trusted team of executives nearly 15 years ago, eager to spend more time with Clara, I never let go of the reins entirely. I retained the controlling interest. And more importantly, I retained the real estate portfolio. I own the warehouses, vast steel behemoths humming with activity just off the interstates. I own the land they sit on. And, as a strategic investment to diversify away from purely agricultural assets, I own a substantial portfolio of commercial properties, including the magnificent, historic Lexington Mercantile Exchange downtown, a towering limestone edifice where men in $1,000 suits pay rent to Thorne Holdings, a shell company I set up in '05, without ever realizing the rent checks eventually find their way into my account. I prefer it this way. Silence, I've always found, is a kind of power. It allows you to observe, to listen, to understand the true lay of the land without revealing your hand. But even silence, I've learned, has its limits. And my limit, unequivocally, was reached yesterday, on Thanksgiving Day. Our home had always been a sanctuary of peace, a testament to the life Clara and I had painstakingly built together. At 68, Clara still moved with a gentle grace that captivated me, her silver hair often pulled back in a soft bun, her eyes still sparkling with warmth, though time and hardship had etched their lines around them. Life, however, hadn't been kind to her physically. 10 years ago, we were driving back from a weekend getaway, enjoying the rolling hills of Kentucky, when a deer suddenly darted onto Interstate 64. I swerved hard to avoid it, losing control. The The car rolled twice before coming to a stop in the median. Clara, with an instinct that defied reason, had thrown herself over our then 25-year-old daughter, Julia, shielding her from the shattering glass and the impact. Julia walked away without a scratch. A miracle. Clara, on the other hand, suffered a severe head injury and, due to the concussive blast, lost 50% of her hearing in her left ear and 40% in her right. She wears hearing aids now. They're discreet, top-of-the-line models. Expensive, yes. But to me, they are more than just medical devices. They are medals of honor, tangible symbols of a mother's profound sacrifice. They represent a love that put another life before her own. To my son-in-law, Derek Harrison, however, they were, apparently, a punchline. Derek is 40 years old, an age when a man should be settling into his stride, building a life of substance. Instead, he's a director at Legacy Capital Holdings, a commercial real estate firm that specializes in high-end office spaces. Ironically, one of the primary tenants in my Lexington Mercantile Exchange building. He drives a leased BMW, always the newest model, wears watches that cost more than my first tractor, and has a smile that looks like it was meticulously practiced in front of a mirror, a veneer of charm over a hollow core. He married my daughter Julia 5 years ago. Julia used to be sharp, independent, and kind, with a spirit as vibrant as the spring bloom. But over the last 5 years, I've watched her shrink, her laughter becoming less frequent, her opinions less pronounced. She's become a shadow, nodding along to everything Derek says, terrified, it seems, of rocking the boat, of disturbing the carefully constructed facade of their perfect life. It was a slow erosion, almost imperceptible day by day, but stark when you looked at the woman she once was compared to the woman she had become. We were all gathered around the antique mahogany dining room table, the good china, a wedding gift to Clara and me from my grandmother, glinting under the chandelier. I had just finished carving the turkey, the golden brown skin glistening, a skill I'd perfected over decades. Derek, on his third glass of Kentucky bourbon, was, as usual, holding court. He was pontificating about a potential promotion to partner at his firm, gesticulating wildly with his fork, nearly impaling a perfectly roasted Brussels sprout. "You listen to me, Art," he said. "Not Dad. Never, sir. Always, Art." Delivered with a casual dismissiveness that grated on my nerves. "This merger is going to be huge. Legacy Capital is looking to buy equity in the Lexington Mercantile Exchange downtown. Once I close this deal, I'm going to be running the entire commercial division. We're talking 7 figures? Easily." I kept chewing my turkey slowly, savoring the richness of the dark meat, though I had to bite my tongue to keep from letting out a booming laugh. The Lexington Mercantile Exchange. My building, the one I bought through Thorn Holdings in 2005. A quiet acquisition that flew under the radar of every local paper, every real estate blog. Derek had been working in my building for 5 years, complaining incessantly about the management, about the elevators being too slow, about the outdated lobby fixtures, never once realizing that the hefty rent checks his company signed every month eventually found their way into my trust fund. It was an exquisite irony, one that only Clara and Frank Pierce, my attorney, were privy to. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility, Derek," Clara said softly, her voice gentle, almost hesitant. She leaned forward slightly, cupping her hand behind her ear, a familiar gesture born of necessity, straining to hear over the background noise of the football game blaring from the television in the den. "Did you say you're buying into a tower, Derek?" The room went quiet. Clara had missed the context, a common occurrence with ambient noise, despite her expensive aids. It was an innocent question, asked with genuine curiosity, perhaps even a touch of maternal pride in her son-in-law's perceived success. But to Derek, it was an interruption, an affront to his grand narrative. He sighed loudly, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling, a theatrical display of exasperation. He looked at Julia, then back at Clara. Then he did something that made the blood freeze in my veins, a cold wave washing over me. He started moving his lips without making a sound. He exaggerated his mouth movements, like a mime trapped in a soundless box, pretending to speak but silencing his voice. Clara frowned, confused, a flicker of vulnerability in her kind eyes. She tapped her hearing aid, thinking the battery had died. a common fear for anyone reliant on such technology. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly, the fragile tremor of an elderly woman unsure of herself. "I can't hear you. Is my device off?" Derek burst out laughing. It was a loud, braying sound, devoid of humor, an aggressive bark that echoed off the high ceilings of our dining room, jarring every nerve. "Oh my God, Clara!" he shouted, his voice laced with cruel glee. "I was just mouthing the words. I was messing with you. You should have seen your face. You looked like a deer in headlights." I looked at Julia. My daughter, the woman Clara had shielded with her body, the reason for her hearing loss. I waited. I waited for her to defend her mother, to tell her husband to show some respect. I waited for the strong, independent Julia I had raised. Instead, Julia looked down at her mashed potatoes, a weak, nervous chuckle escaping her lips. "Derek, stop it," she whispered, her voice barely audible, devoid of any real force, more of a plea than a command. "What?" Derek said, still grinning, his eyes glinting with malice as he looked at me, challenging me. "It's just a joke, Art. Lighten up. Honestly, Clara, you need to upgrade those things. Or maybe it's not the ears. Maybe the brain's getting a little slow too, huh?" Time stopped. The rich scent of turkey faded. The clinking of silverware, the distant murmur of the football game, all receded into a distant hum. In my mind, I was back on Interstate 64. I saw the smoke, the crumpled metal, the blood on Clara's face. I saw her screaming in pain, unable to hear the paramedics because her eardrums had shattered, saving the woman sitting right next to Derek. That woman, my daughter, was now sipping her wine, letting this clown humiliate the mother who saved her life, the woman who had sacrificed a piece of herself for her. The silence from Julia was a betrayal more profound than any insult Derek could muster. I didn't scream. Men who build empires, who navigate the treacherous waters of commodity markets and labor disputes, do not need to scream. My anger, a slow, simmering heat that had always been my secret engine, began to churn. I carefully, deliberately, placed my silverware down on the porcelain plate. The clink of the metal against the china cut through Derek's fading laughter like a gunshot. Derek stopped laughing. He looked at me, a smirk still playing on his lips, a challenge in his eyes. "What's the matter, Art? Turkey too dry?" I stood up. I'm 70, yes, but I stand 6'2", and a lifetime of working farms, lifting heavy feed sacks, and overseeing the loading of countless trucks has kept a certain strength in my frame. I placed my hands on the table, leaning in slightly, my eyes locked on his. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, steady, and colder than the November air outside. Derek blinked, his smirk faltering. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my voice unwavering. "Get out of my house right now. Both of you." "Dad, please," Julia started, her voice shrill, a thin tremor of panic in it. "He's just joking. It's Thanksgiving. Don't ruin this." I turned my gaze to my daughter, my eyes boring into hers. "I am not the one ruining it, Julia," I said, each word a chisel. "Your husband just insulted your mother for a disability she acquired saving your life. And you laughed. You are both leaving now." Derek stood up, throwing his napkin onto his half-eaten meal with a dramatic flourish. His face turned red, not with shame, but with a sudden, ugly surge of anger, the true face of a man whose ego had been punctured. "Are you serious? You're kicking us out over a joke? You know, this is exactly why we don't visit more often. You're a bitter, sensitive old man." "I am a man who demands respect in his own home," I replied, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cold November air rush in, a fitting counterpoint to the heat building inside me. "Go." Derek grabbed his jacket from the coat rack with unnecessary force. He marched past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally, a childish act of aggression. He stopped on the porch, turned around, and pointed a finger in my face, his jaw tight. "You're making a big mistake, Art," he sneered, his voice laced with venom. "You think you can treat me like this? I'm the future of this family. I'm the one making the real money now. You're just a retired farmer living off Social Security and a pension from that dusty old grain company." He paused, a cruel glint in his eyes, knowing precisely where to strike. And hey, don't forget, you promised to sign that guarantor loan for Julia next week. We need that $500,000 to secure the down payment on the new house. You treat me like dirt? Maybe I'll tell Julia we don't need your help. Maybe we'll just cut you off from seeing your grandson, Ethan, entirely. That was the leverage. That was always the leverage. My grandson, Ethan, wasn't with us today. He was on a school trip with his first grade class. They used him as a pawn, a chip in their manipulative game. Get off my property, I said, my voice low, a warning growl. Fine, Derek spat, turning away. Come on, Julia, let's go. Let these two rot in their silence. Julia scurried past me, avoiding my eyes, her face pale, her shoulders slumped. I'll call you tomorrow, Dad, she whispered, a desperate plea for normalcy. But I didn't answer. I watched them get into that leased BMW, its sleek, dark form a symbol of the superficiality they chased. I watched their taillights disappear down the long driveway. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the house. Clara was still sitting at the dining room table, her hands covering her hearing aids, soft sobs shaking her shoulders. I walked over, my heart breaking, and wrapped my arms around her. I kissed the top of her silver head. I'm sorry, Art, she sobbed, her voice muffled. I ruined dinner. You did nothing wrong, Clara, I told her, my voice thick with emotion. But I promise you this, my love. That man will never step foot in this house again. I looked out the window at the empty driveway. He thinks I'm a powerless old man. He thinks I'm just a signature on a loan document, a relic from a bygone era. Derek Harrison had made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He had judged the book by its cover. He thought he was dealing with a senile retiree, a pushover. He didn't know he had just declared war on the owner of the very ground he stood on, the foundation beneath his leased BMW, and the ceiling over his head. I walked to my study, the quiet sanctuary where I managed my affairs, the nerve center of an empire no one knew existed. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Julia to apologize. I didn't call to smooth things over. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 months, a number reserved for only the most serious matters. Franklin, I said when the crisp, professional voice answered. Franklin Pierce had been my attorney for 40 years, a man whose quiet demeanor belied the razor-sharp mind beneath. He was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who understood the nuances of power and the brutal realities of commerce. Art, Franklin sounded surprised, his voice hinting at the unexpected call on a holiday. Happy Thanksgiving. Everything all right? No, Franklin, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I need you to open the file on Legacy Capital Holdings. Specifically, I want to know everything about an employee named Derek Harrison. And Franklin, freeze the trust fund I set up for Julia immediately. Consider it done, Franklin said, his tone shifting instantly from friend to counsel, his mind already spinning. What's the play, Art? The play? I said, looking at the framed family photo on my desk where Derek's practiced smile mocked me, a silent challenge. Is total demolition. He wants to buy into my building. Let's invite him in. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes who sits at the head of the table. I hung up the phone. My hands were not shaking. I felt a calm, cold clarity settle over me, a terrifying resolve. The turkey was cold on the dining room table, but my resolve was burning hot. Tomorrow morning was going to be very interesting indeed. The morning after Thanksgiving usually brings a sense of quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from a full refrigerator, a house that has been well lived in, and the lingering scent of festive meals. But this Friday morning, the silence in my kitchen felt heavy, suffocating, like the still, humid air before a violent Kentucky thunderstorm. I sat at the head of the breakfast nook table, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago, the rich aroma doing little to lift the pall. Through the bay window, I could see Clara in her rose garden. She was wrapped in her thick wool cardigan, her shoulders slightly stooped, meticulously deadheading the last of the autumn roses. She moved with a slow, deliberate sadness that twisted a knife in my gut, a physical ache in my chest. She wasn't wearing her hearing aids today. She often took them out when she wanted to shut out the world, to retreat into the quiet solace of her own thoughts. And after the humiliation Derek had subjected her to last night, I couldn't blame her for wanting silence, for wanting to escape the harsh realities of a world that had suddenly become too loud, too cruel. My phone sat on the granite countertop, face up, a black rectangle of potential trouble. It had been buzzing intermittently for the last hour, a series of short, insistent vibrations, but I hadn't touched it. I knew who it was. It wasn't a call of apology, not from Derek. Men like him don't apologize because they don't believe they are ever wrong. To them, the world is merely a stage where they are the shining protagonist, and everyone else is either a supporting character, an admiring audience member, or, failing that, a disposable obstacle. I finally reached out and tapped the screen, the cool glass surprisingly heavy under my finger. There was a text message from Julia. I put on my reading glasses, a sliver of hope flickering within me that I might find a trace of the daughter I had raised, the girl who used to scrap her knees, climbing the old oak in the backyard and come running to me for a Band-Aid, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain and trust. The message, however, extinguished that hope like a snuffed candle. It read, "Derek is extremely hurt by your behavior last night. He feels completely disrespected in front of the family after working so hard to secure our future. If you don't apologize to him and sign the guarantor paperwork for the $500,000 loan by Monday morning, we will not be bringing Ethan for Christmas. We need space from your toxicity until you can learn to support us." I read it twice, the words blurring, then sharpening, then blurring again. Asterisk. Toxicity. Asterisk. That was the word she chose. I built a logistics empire moving hazardous materials across 12 states, negotiating routes through treacherous terrain, ensuring the safe transport of substances that could, quite literally, poison the land. I know what toxic is. Toxic is not kicking a disrespectful man out of your house for humiliating your disabled wife. Toxic is weaponizing a 6-year-old boy, your own son, because your inflated ego got bruised. Toxic is using my grandson, the only person in this world who looks at me with pure, unadulterated love, as a bargaining chip for a bank loan. The sheer audacity, the cold calculation of it, churned in my stomach like spoiled milk. I looked at the calendar on the wall, a simple farm-themed print with local fairs and harvest festivals marked. Christmas was exactly 1 month away. Ethan had been talking about building a treehouse with me in the old oak tree since July, his small hands sketching elaborate plans on napkins. I had already bought the lumber. It was stacked neatly in the shed, covered by a tarp, waiting for our project. Now, that lumber might just rot there, all because I refused to let a mediocre real estate broker mock my wife's disability. A surge of anger, so potent, it made my hand tremble, coursed through me. They claimed the $500,000 was for a down payment on a new property in a prestigious Lexington neighborhood, a place that would signal to all of Derek's superficial friends and colleagues that he had finally arrived. He claimed he needed the liquidity to close the deal before his year-end bonus cleared, a plausible story on the surface. But looking at that text message, at the raw desperation hidden behind the threat, something didn't sit right. A man confident in his finances, a man truly secure in his career, does not forbid a grandfather from seeing his grandson over a signature on a loan document. A man who truly believes in his worth does not crumble into such a petty, vindictive rage because his father-in-law asked him to leave a dinner table. There was a chasm between his boasts and his actions, a gaping hole I suspected was financial, not merely emotional. I was about to dial Franklin Pierce to tell him to annul the trust fund I had set up for Julia, to cut the cord entirely and let them float in the deep end, when my phone lit up again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a push notification from the First National Bank security app. Asterisk, high value transaction declined. Unusual activity detected. Asterisk, I swiped the notification open, my eyes narrowing as I parsed the data on the screen. Amount, $20,000. Merchant, Golden Steed Online Casino. Card ending in 4098. Status, declined. Over limit. I stared at the numbers until they blurred, then sharpened again. Card 4098. That wasn't Derek's primary card. That wasn't even my Time's primary card. That was the emergency supplementary card I had issued to Julia 10 years ago when she went off to college, a safeguard. It was a card with a specific, unbreakable rule attached to it. It was for medical emergencies, for car breakdowns in the middle of nowhere, for life or death situations, and absolutely nothing else. I hadn't seen a charge on that card in 3 years. The last time it was used was when Julia had a flat tire on I-75 outside of Louisville and needed a tow. Now, at 9:15 inches the morning on Black Friday, someone had tried to dump $20,000 of my money onto a virtual blackjack table. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced, unbidden, vivid as if it were yesterday. Julia, at 7 years old, standing in my old farm workshop, wearing oversized coveralls that swallowed her small frame. I was teaching her how to sort bolts and nuts, the simple, satisfying rhythm of manual labor. I handed her $5 for her help, a reward for a job well done. She asked if she could go buy candy at the corner store. I told her that if she saved it, I would double it next week. She thought about it, her little brow furrowed in concentration, and then she carefully put the crisp bill into a glass jar on my workbench. She was so careful then, so thoughtful. She understood the weight of labor, the value of a dollar earned. She understood that money represented time and effort, not just endless consumption. Now, she was married to a man who treated my credit limit like a bottomless pit, and she was, metaphorically, handing him the shovel. There was no way Julia was gambling 20 grand. This was Derek. He had taken her card, likely while she was sleeping or distracted, and tried to make a desperate play. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut. This was not a mistake. You don't accidentally type in a 16-digit card number, an expiration date, and a 3-digit security code onto an offshore gambling site. This was desperation. Pure, unadulterated panic. The threat about Christmas. The rush for the $500,000 loan. The explosive anger at dinner when I challenged him. It all snapped into chilling focus. It wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about a house in a prestigious Lexington neighborhood. Derek was drowning. A man who tries to charge $20,000 to his father-in-law's emergency card the morning after being kicked out isn't looking to expand his portfolio. He's looking for a lifeline, a quick fix for a problem that was clearly spiraling out of control. I did not call Julia. I did not text back to argue about Christmas. I tapped the contact for Franklin Pierce. He answered on the first ring. Franklin, a man who seemed to have an internal clock set to work, was always on, even on holiday weekends. Art, he said, his voice gravelly but calm. I assume you're calling to vent about the turkey? I'm calling to stop a hemorrhage, I said, my voice steady, cold as riverstone. Franklin, I need you to execute a protocol immediately. Access the family-authorized user accounts. I want you to freeze everything. The credit cards, the joint checking access I gave Julia for household expenses, the emergency lines of credit. Cut them all off right now. Leave nothing. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of silent consideration. I heard the faint click of a keyboard, Franklin's fingers already flying across the keys. Art, this is a nuclear option. Did they call you? They did more than call, I replied, watching Clara wipe a tear from her cheek in the garden, her back to the house, oblivious to the storm gathering inside. Derek just tried to run a $20,000 charge through an online casino using Julia's emergency card. The transaction failed because I kept the limit on that specific card lower than he apparently realized, a safeguard against impulsive spending. But the intent was clearly there. He tried to steal from me, Franklin. From us. Franklin let out a low whistle, a sound that conveyed a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation. That changes the landscape considerably, Art. That's not a domestic dispute. That's attempted fraud. That's a felony. It is, I said. But Franklin, freezing the accounts is not enough. I want you to dig. I want a full forensic accounting on Derek Harrison. I want to know why a director of real estate, who claims to be on the verge of a 7-figure merger, is so desperate for $500,000 in cash that he's threatening to withhold my grandson. Find out who he owes, Franklin. Find out how deep the hole is. Because I have a feeling that $500,000 loan he wants me to sign for is not for a house. It's for a life raft. I turned away from the window, my gaze falling on the empty spot on the wall where a family portrait used to hang, one of Julia and Derek, their smiles plastered on, a facade that now felt utterly hollow. And I want to know exactly how heavy the stone tied to his ankle is, I whispered into the phone, my voice low and grim, before I decide whether to cut the rope or let him sink. Get me everything, Franklin. Every debt, every lien, every secret. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with when I destroy him. Franklin Pierce pulled into my driveway exactly 2 hours after our phone call. He drove a black Cadillac sedan that looked like it belonged to a government agency, understated but undeniably powerful. When he stepped out, clutching a thick manila folder against his chest, his expression was grim, a taut line across his face. Franklin has seen everything in his 40 years of practicing law, from corporate espionage and hostile takeovers to nasty divorces and high-stakes criminal defenses. So, when his face looks like a storm front moving in across the Kentucky plains, you know the news isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. I let him in without a word. We walked past the living room where Clara was resting on the sofa, her eyes closed, listening to an audiobook with her one good ear pressed to the pillow, a quiet refuge from the world. We went straight to my study, the only room in the house where the air didn't feel suffocating, where I could think with clarity. I sat behind my massive oak desk, the same desk where I had signed the papers to sell the management rights of Maxwell Grain and Goods years ago, a place where monumental decisions were made. Franklin sat opposite me, placing the folder on the polished mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud, a sound that resonated with the weight of its contents. You were right to freeze the accounts, Art, Franklin said, skipping the pleasantries, his voice low and devoid of judgment, just the facts. But the gambling debt, that was just the tip of the iceberg. That $20,000 charge was a Hail Mary pass. He was trying to turn 20 grand into 500 grand in a single morning because he is running out of time. And he's desperate. I looked at the folder, the bland manila containing secrets that could unravel lives. I was afraid to open it, yet I needed to know. What is it, Franklin? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, dread coiling in my gut. Is it loan sharks? Is he in debt to the wrong people? The kind of people you don't want knocking on your door at 3 a.m? Franklin shook his head slowly, his gaze steady, regret shadowing his eyes. It's worse, Art. It's corporate theft, felony embezzlement. He flipped the folder open, revealing a stack of documents. Spread out before me were copies of internal emails from Legacy Capital Holdings, meticulously detailed bank transfer records, and a preliminary audit report marked confidential, internal use only. The paper trail was damning, meticulously assembled. Your son-in-law is not getting promoted to partner, Art, Franklin explained, his voice low, precise, cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. He is currently the subject of a quiet internal investigation at Legacy Capital Holdings. It appears that over the last 6 months, Derek has been systematically diverting client escrow deposits into a personal holding account. He's been moving money around, using new deposits to pay off old ones, a classic Ponzi scheme structure, all within his own deals. But last week, a major commercial deal for a new development on the outskirts of Lexington fell through unexpectedly. The client, a very demanding hedge fund out of New York, demanded their substantial deposit back immediately. No questions asked. I stared at the numbers highlighted in yellow marker on one of the audit reports. The missing sum was exactly $485,000. It wasn't an approximation. It was precise. The kind of exactitude that screams of deliberate action. He needs $500,000 not to buy a house in a prestigious Lexington neighborhood, Art, Franklin continued, his words landing like hammer blows. He needs it to refill that escrow account before the external auditors arrive on Monday morning. If that money is not back in place by the start of business next week, he's not just looking at getting fired and having his real estate license revoked. He's looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. Maybe more, given the amount and the identity theft aspects for the house loan. I leaned back in my chair, the old leather creaking under my weight, a protest against the revelation. The audacity of it was breathtaking, truly staggering. He had come into my home, eaten my food, mocked my wife, and threatened to take my grandson away, all while standing on a trapdoor of his own making, a precipice of his own design. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was asking me to be his accomplice, to cover up a felony, to become an unwitting participant in his criminal enterprise. He wanted me to sign a guarantor loan, so he could wash his hands of a crime he committed to fund his leased BMWs, his expensive watches, and his bloated ego. It was beyond contempt. "And Julia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question a shard of glass in my throat. "Does she know about any of this? The theft? The embezzled money?" Franklin sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "There is no direct evidence she knows about the theft. Art, not definitively, at least not in a way that would make her legally complicit, but she knows they are broke. Her personal credit report, which I pulled, shows they are maxed out on every card, leveraged to the hilt, living month to month on the ragged edge of financial ruin. She is likely terrified, Art. She thinks this loan is to save their lifestyle, to keep up appearances. She probably has no idea it is to keep her husband out of handcuffs, to prevent him from rotting away in a federal prison cell." I looked down at the documents again, my eyes scanning the letterhead of Derek's company, Legacy Capital Holdings. I saw the sleek, modern logo, a stylized horse's head against a blue background, symbolizing Lexington's identity. I saw the address listed at the bottom of the page. Suite 1200, 101 Main Street, Lexington, KY. The Lexington Mercantile Exchange. I stopped, my gaze fixed on the address. I read it again, slowly, letting the words sink in. Asterisk 101, Main Street asterisk. Then I looked up at Franklin, a slow, cold realization dawning on me, a chilling understanding that sent a shiver down my spine. "Franklin," I said, my voice quiet, almost hoarse. "Derek works in the Lexington Mercantile Exchange." Franklin nodded, a small, grim smile playing on his lips, a testament to his own appreciation of the bitter irony. "I checked that myself this morning, Art. Legacy Capital Holdings leases the entire 12th floor. They've been tenants for 5 years, just renewed their lease negotiations 6 months ago. They pay a premium for that view, overlooking Gratz Park." A dry, rattling sound escaped my chest. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a humorless, almost guttural sound, deep and raw. Derek Harrison had spent years complaining about that building. At Christmas dinners, he would whine about the elevators being too slow, or the lobby being outdated, or the ownership being some faceless geriatric conglomerate that didn't understand modern business needs, sneering at its history, its solid, unchanging presence. He had openly mocked the very structure that put a roof over his head during the workday, the edifice that represented stability and heritage. "He works in my house," I said, the irony tasting like iron in my mouth, bitter and metallic. "He sat at my table, ate my food, called me a useless old man, while sitting in an office that I own. He pays rent to me. His boss pays rent to me. Every single dollar goes into my pocket." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bare branches of the oak trees, their skeletal forms stark against the winter sky. The rage I had felt last night, the sharp, fiery burst of indignation, had crystallized into something colder, harder, infinitely more dangerous. It was no longer about anger, it was about justice, about an unwavering sense of retribution. Derek Miller thought he was a shark swimming among minnows, a big fish in a small pond. He didn't realize he was swimming in my tank. "He wants money," I said to my reflection in the glass, my voice a low growl. "He wants a bailout. He thinks he can bully a senile old grandfather into signing a check for $500,000. I turned back to Franklin, my attorney. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, waiting for the order. He knew me. He knew I didn't get to where I was by letting people steal from me or disrespect my family. "Don't give him a dime, Franklin," I said, my voice firm, absolute. Franklin closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Understood. I will draft the rejection letter for the loan guarantor. We can have it delivered by courier to his home this afternoon." "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "That's too easy. A letter he can rip up, a letter he can hide from Julia. He needs to face the consequences, head on." I walked back to the desk and tapped my finger on the Legacy Capital Holdings letterhead, the elegant logo a cruel joke now. He thinks I'm a relic. He thinks I'm powerless. Let's show him exactly how much power this relic has. "Franklin, I want you to call the CEO of Legacy Capital Holdings. Use the Thorn Holdings name. Tell him the owner of the Lexington Mercantile Exchange wants to review the tenant agreement personally. Tell him the ownership is looking to restructure the lease and is interested in meeting with their top performers to discuss equity opportunities. A strategic partnership. Franklin's eyebrows shot up, a rare display of surprise. You want to meet him, Art? In person? I want to meet the man who thinks he's too good for my family, I said, my voice resonating with an unshakable resolve. But I don't want to meet him as his father-in-law. I want to meet him as his landlord. I want to meet him as the man who holds the keys to his office and, apparently, the keys to his freedom. Set up a meeting, Franklin. Tell them the chairman of Thorn Holdings is coming down from the mountain, making a rare appearance. Tell them I want to meet their rising star, the man who is about to make partner. I want to look him in the eye when he thinks he's winning, when he thinks he's pulled off the greatest con of his life. Franklin stood up, buttoning his jacket with a practiced hand. He looked at me, a mixture of concern and admiration in his eyes, a flicker of professional respect. This is going to destroy him, Art, he said, his voice quiet, serious. If you walk into that office as the owner of the building, and you expose him for the fraud he is, he will never recover. His career will be over. His reputation will be in tatters. He might even lose his family. I thought about Clara, crying at the dining room table, her hands covering her hearing aids, the profound sadness in her eyes. I thought about the silence in her world, a silence Derek had mocked for a cheap laugh, a fleeting moment of self-aggrandizement. I thought about the $20,000 he tried to steal from my daughter's emergency card, a card meant for true crises, not for funding a gambling addiction. I thought about Ethan, my grandson, being used as a bargaining chip, his innocence weaponized. I am not pushing him off the ledge, Franklin, I said quietly, my gaze unwavering. He jumped a long time ago. I am just the one who is going to remove the safety net he thinks is there. He built his own gallows. I'm just providing the rope. I turned away from the window, walking back to my desk. Make the call, Franklin. I want that meeting tomorrow. And Franklin? Yes, Art. Make sure he knows this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I want him to walk into that room thinking he has won the lottery. I want him to believe he is the smartest man in Lexington. Franklin nodded, a slow, understanding smile spreading across his face. Consider it done, Art. He'll be there. He left the room, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone in the silence of my study. I looked at the picture of my grandson on the bookshelf, a joyful image of a small boy with bright eyes. I was doing this for him, too. A boy needs a father, yes. But a boy does not need a father who is a thief and a bully, a man devoid of integrity. Sometimes you have to burn the field to save the crop. I sat back down in my chair, the leather creaking softly, and waited for the phone to ring. The game had changed. Derek Harrison thought he was playing poker with a blind man, an easy mark. He was about to find out that the house always wins, especially when he's playing in my house.